All right, we're still reading Johnny Tremain, and this is by Esther Forbes, and illustrated by Lynd Ward, and published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. So we are way into the book. This is chapter 8. We previously read section 3, which is mostly about Rab trying to get a gun. He really wants to have a musket. He's annoyed, and he's never annoyed. And he's annoyed by the fact that he doesn't have a good gun and that the British soldiers all have these really nice guns. And so he tries to arrange with a kind of a dishonest farmer person about getting a gun, but the group is caught and they all are arrested. But the worst part, he says, is that the authorities are laughing at him, and they call him a boy and they throw him out. They don't tar and feather him like they do the farmer, and so he's really kind of irritated about that because he's always kind of seen himself, and the author kind of portrays him to be the more adult person, and so then he is like thrown out like a child. So that really bothers him. But he says, luckily I didn't give my money in advance. I'll return it to Aunt Jennifer. And so he's just really annoyed by that. Johnny, on the other hand, is kind of upset that Rab is talking so much about war. It really frightens him. And Johnny, as we've seen in some of the previous sections, is almost like friends with some of the British officers because they really are. He sees that everybody has a good side to them. And so this is really difficult to think of them as targets like the enemy, like Rab is. Those white crosses on their chests are easy to sight on. So war is never pretty. Section 4. Back of the lighthouse were apple trees, now heavy with fruit. Johnny and Cilla sat together on a bench. He had missed her that month she had been out in Milton. It was still summer, but everywhere you could smell and feel the coming of fall. It had been an interesting conversation. Madge had run off and married Sergeant Gale, and Ma had been so put to it to keep Mr. Tweedy in the family, she had married him herself. She said he was too old for me, and she knows he's too young for her, but he's a clever smith, and she's going to hang on to him, come hell and high water. Cilla bent her face over the work in her lap. She was rolling a tiny hem on a tiny handkerchief, one of Miss Lavinia's. So she's Mrs. Tweedy now. Yes, Maria Tweedy. That's not so bad. You know, you have to marry someone whose last name goes with your first. For instance, if my name was Rue, I couldn't marry a man named Barb. Or if my name happened to be Tobacco, I couldn't marry a man called Pouch or Pipe. So she's putting together like rhubarb or tobacco pouch. Nobody was ever named Tobacco. You don't know. If a southern merchant made a lot of money on tobacco, I think he might name his daughter Tobacco. We make money on codfish around here, and I never heard anyone calling his girl Codfish. You're just being silly. But I like to be silly. I like to plan things out. For instance, I couldn't marry a man called... Anybody called Priscilla can marry anybody. No, they can't. For instance, I couldn't marry Rab. Johnny froze. From being mildly irritated, but interested, he was a little angry. Nobody asked you to, he said shortly. I know, but a girl has to think about things like that. Almost anything can happen to a girl, suddenly. And she has to think ahead so she'll know which way to jump. Rab wouldn't marry you. He's too wonderful. Cilla gave him one of her sweet, veiled glances out of the corner of her eye. That's what you mean? It was exactly what Johnny had meant. Of course not, but he's not like any other boy I ever knew. Cilla did not look at the work in her idle fingers. She stared off down Beacon Hill. From where they sat, she could see the ocean. They could see the ocean. I know that, but when you get to really know him, he doesn't seem so wonderful. I mean, he's just as wonderful, but a whole lot nicer. Johnny did not want to ask the next question, but he could not help it. How'd you get to know him so well? She looked surprised. Why, he comes here and takes me walking and buys me sweets, and once he took me to Old South to hear Dr. Warren. Rab had never said anything about this to Johnny. It was well enough to say Rab was secretive by nature and couldn't help the way God had made him, but Johnny felt piqued. Cilla noticed in the shadow on his face. Priscilla Silsby is poor, but Cilla Silsby is worse. Johnny's lower lip stuck out. He's pouting. Seemingly without any action of the wind, his fair hair was rumpled all over his head. But Priscilla Tremain is a fine name, she went on. I've thought about that ever since you came to the shop and Mother told me I had to marry you. I was 11 then. They had both been 11. She, a skinny little thing with a gentle face and disturbing tongue. Her clothes had always been too big for her because they were handed down from Dorcas. She had had to pin her skirts tight about her waist to keep them on. Pretty and shabby and sweet and sour. Johnny had liked her right off. He had not thought much about what she looked like now, but he looked at her as she bent her face to her work. The little pointed chin settled into the fresh white ruffles about her throat. Somehow her hair was curly around the edges and straight everywhere else. She had a shallow little nose, and on either side of the bridge lay those long lashes which could mock him as well as her tongue. And so pretty, he could not believe it. He was accustomed to staring at Lavinia Light's famous beauty, and to feel a pleasant tingle up and down his spine. And now it was Cilla Lapham, just good old Cilla, that was giving him the spinal creeps. And it sounds negative, but it's like he likes her because they're both growing up and she's getting to be a very pretty girl. When he was 11, he had said he would marry her if he had to. And when he was 14, he had said he wouldn't take her on a gold platter. He was 15 now, and soon he would be a grown-up man going courting like Rab. Cilla was packing up her sewing. Miss Lavinia will be wanting her tea, and I must get Isana dressed, brushed, powdered, and perfumed to sit with her. One of the soldiers of the 4th Regiment who were encamped upon the common was earning a little money helping at the light stable. As Cilla moved away from Johnny, the groom leaped forward to open the kitchen door for her. Why, that mannered monkey, bowing and flunkying about because of just Cilla Lapham. That red-headed parrot couldn't even talk English right. But he had known what Johnny had not. Cilla was a grown-up young lady, and she was pretty. Cilla, Johnny yelled at her, come back a moment, please. She left the groom bowing and smirking. Yes, she said, standing before Johnny under the apple trees. Look here, what's that fellow's name? Pumpkin? That's not a name. Yes, it is. It is. No girl could be a Mrs. Pumpkin. Nobody ever. So he's just checking in. You don't like that boy, do you? There was so long a pause, Johnny's next words sounded awkward. You were right about one thing. Priscilla Tremain. That's a fine name. He had meant to make a joke, but as the words left his mouth, it was not. They both stood, embarrassed, looking at their feet. Cilla did not answer, but she reached up through the foliage of the tree and picked a little green apple. Foliage is leaves. She gave it to him. I didn't know even winter apples were still so green, she said, and walked off toward the house without a glance for the admiring pumpkin. Johnny put the apple in his pocket. He'd keep it forever. It meant that Cilla really thought Tremain was a fine name. No, you can't keep even little green apples forever. It would wizen up or grow ripe, or it might rot. Human relations never seem to stand completely still. This apple, for instance, it might ripen into something better than it now was, or, unromantically, it might rot away in his pocket. He put it on the windowsill and a little superstitiously waited to see what it would do. But Rab ate the apple. Johnny, already jealous for the first time in his life over Rab's taking Cilla out buying her sweets and never saying anything, tried his best to quarrel with a puzzled Rab over this apple. It ended as Johnny might have guessed it would. Rab refused to be impressed with his crime. All he had done was to eat a wormy, no-good apple. He'd give Johnny a peck of better ones, just so you'll stop glaring at me. Was it really wormy, Rab? It was. He had been a fool to think of the apple as a symbol of himself and Cilla. And that's the end of section 4. We'll have another video for section 5, so click subscribe and come back for the next one and for the math videos. See you real soon.